Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Housing and Community Services Scrutiny Panel. Before we start these proceedings, may I bring to your attention some housekeeping matters. There is no expected fire alarm today, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit and meet at the fire assembly point in the Civic Square. Please can I ask that your microphone is turned on when addressing the meeting and it's switched off when you're not using it. Please turn your mobile phones to silent. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. Councillors are specifically, oh no, that's an old one, forget that. Today we have apologies from the chair and we're currently down a vice chair. Therefore, can I seek nominations from the committee for the appointment of the chair for today's meeting, please? Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. Thanks. I would like to nominate Councillor Coker as the senior scrutineer present by virtue of chairing the board.
Thank you.
I think that would be most appropriate.
Do I have a seconder for that nomination, please? Councillor Penrose. Are there any other nominations on the floor? Okay, we'll move to the vote for Councillor Coker to be chair for today's meeting, please. A show of hands. Six for. Any abstentions? Councillor Coker. And any against? Thank you. Councillor Coker, if you'd like to move around.
Okay, thanks members for your support in this. Okay, so we will start the meeting properly. So obviously I have to officially...
Sorry to intervene. Can I propose Councillor Poyser as your vice chair? Because it's good to have eyes and ears to help the chair if you're happy to support that.
Yeah, no problems. But I've done them on my own, but I'm quite happy if Councillor Poyser wishes to do that. Are members in agreement? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Poyser, come and join me. Okay, I'm gonna press on because we obviously started late. Officially now that the meeting has started, Elliot, could we just go through the apologies to officially note them, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Finn, Chair, and Councillor Anne Freeman.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, has any members got any declarations of interest for today's meeting? No declarations of interest. Item number 3, the panel is asked to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July. Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposed by Councillor Nicholson, seconded by Councillor Stevens. I do need to take a vote. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 4, Chair's urgent business. Has the Chair got any in his absence?
No, none for you today, Chair, apart from to welcome Councillor Nicholson to the committee.
Okay, welcome Councillor Nicholson. Right, we now move on to the meaty bits of the agenda. So the item number 5 is building bridges to opportunity update. I believe that Councillor Pemberthy is here, so welcome Chris, with an introduction and supported by Nick Shaw from Public Health. So welcome. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, and I'm going to make my bit brief because Councillor Finn asked for this to come on to this committee meeting. You might be aware that we had it at the last meeting with a verbal update. He wanted a formal update at this meeting. We had said we'd come back before cabinet decision. Because we're doing this properly rather than doing it fast, because we don't have a, you've got to do it by a date, we're not anticipating this going to cabinet until March or June. So we were expecting to come back a bit later. So I'll leave it to Nick to take you through the update, but just as a practicality, we're in a process and there won't be an enormous amount of difference between our report this time and our report last time, but Nick will bring you up to date. So I'll hand over to him.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I won't spend ages talking about kind of the history for this and the background, because you had at the last meeting, and it's also in the report. But just as a brief overview, this has actually grown out of the work of the Child Poverty Working Group, and the kind of the recognition that that action plan from that group is now drawing to an end, and thinking about how, as a whole system in Plymouth, we can actually come together to address some of those drivers and impacts of actual poverty in Plymouth. As part of this work, we have now we have a draft of the actual framework, and I can't speak. Sorry, I shall talk through some of the elements of that actual framework in a minute. But I think it's important to also note that this has been developed as part of a kind of, we've taken a whole systems approach in the actual development of the framework, and we've worked with partners from across the actual system in Plymouth, so partners from in the public actual sector, so offices in the council, but also partners from other organisations in Plymouth and people who are living in our communities, and there's more information on some of those groups who we worked with in the report. We started, so the overall, so the draft actual framework that we now have, which is developed out of that piece of engagement work. We had originally planned this around those three core areas of trying to actually reduce the impact for people who are living in poverty, to improve the chances for people who are living in poverty to be able to move out of poverty, and to actually reduce the risk of people actually falling into poverty in Plymouth. That was our starting point with the framework. We had our kind of aim in kind of at the start of the process was thinking about how we thought about what those actions should be as a whole actual system to to actually create that environment where those actual things are possible. What we found with the engagement, which I think also is really important, is that it's not only the actions that are important, it's how those are actually done. And I'll talk through some of those principles that have arisen out of both that early engagement work and the engagement out in our communities as we move through. So as I've mentioned, though, that those core aims of the framework and of this piece of work are those are so that we have that environment in Plymouth where those things, so we kind of reduce the risk of falling into poverty, where people are able to actually lift themselves out of poverty more easily, and people experience less harm from living in poverty. We have had, and I think it's probably worth raising this here, and it was raised, I think, at the last meeting, there have been some actual questions as we've been actually doing that engagement work, and as we've been talking to people about why we aren't actually setting like a hard target of kind of ending poverty in Plymouth. And our kind of reasoning behind that is that we're thinking about how we can act as a local actual system and what's achievable for us within that actual system. So with that kind of recognition that actually it's the experience of living in poverty, the risks of falling into poverty aren't only controlled within our system, and there's a lot of other factors kind of on the national level and on the global scale, which can impact on that experience for people in Plymouth. So it's thinking about how we as a system can achieve these aims to improve outcomes for people in Plymouth. As I mentioned earlier, the kind of initial thoughts when we were thinking about this piece of work and developing the framework were around those things which as a system we ought to do. And in this part of the framework, these were the things we thought we ought to do, which have arisen out of that. So that kind of whole system work and engagement with people in communities. I think if you look at them, it is everything. So I think everything we do, and this ranges from kind of people using, you know, locally owned shops. It ranges from those very individual actions right up to the things which kind of we might actually do as a council. So there's a whole range of activities which are covered there. We split them into these themes. So thinking about kind of improving individual outcomes. So again, thinking about that kind of education, skills, behaviour, supporting individuals and families, some of the work we do as a council to improve access to into benefits, also to improve access to things like food and those other things that can improve outcomes for people. Maximising the actual potential of our whole community, so thinking about neighbourhoods and thinking about the wider actual communities in Plymouth, but also thinking about some of our other communities of kind of interest and identity. So maximising some of the work which we do as a council, but also a lot of the work that happens actually in the communities themselves, which can optimise those outcomes as a whole across the neighbourhoods. Optimising infrastructure and environment. Again, this kind of sits higher up. This is one of the things which sits more with the council and with other statutory actually bodies, but this is about thinking about particularly around the green and the blue space and around our transport links. So improving those aspects of the built and the natural environment. Importantly, again for the council, but also something that is kind of a whole systems thing, is thinking about how we actually develop an economy which works for everybody in Plymouth. So and thinking about the roles that different partners have in that work. And then again, something which feels like it sits within the public sector, but has over time actually is broader. It's thinking about how services are actually delivered with our communities to actually meet the needs of the communities. And this ranges from some of the services which we either actually they deliver or commission as a council, but also broader things and things which had arisen in the conversations with particularly with members of the public, were around healthcare. That's always really important for people living in communities. But also things that we don't often think about, like access into post offices, access to into banks. And I think we mentioned that when I was here last time about that kind of recognition, particularly people who are living in our communities, that access isn't equitable across actually Plymouth, and there's things we can do as a whole system to improve that. As I mentioned earlier, what was a bit unexpected that had arisen out of this engagement work was that actually it's not only things we do which are important, it's how we do them. And out of some of we had, and I mentioned last time that I was here, we had some overarching principles for the piece of work, particularly around being trauma informed, thinking about a whole thingy life course approach, thinking about inequalities. But this is now broadened a bit, and I've got some that I won't talk through them all because I'll be here all afternoon if I try to explain all of them. But there's some more detail in the report, and there'll be more actual detail as we move on with the piece of work. But thinking about these hows can then help to do those bits, and I think this really sits in the public health domain. About thinking how do we improve equity of access to services, but also to people who are living in communities to be able to engage in their actual communities. How do we think about being asset-based? How do we think about those upstream things? So we're not just putting in interventions, we're thinking about what are those drivers of poverty and of poor kind of health and wellbeing outcomes in the population, and thinking about how that's informed. So are we using our data to inform things we do across the whole system, but also we're using those experiences for people who are living in our communities. So we have that draft now of the framework. It's been to the Child Poverty Working Group, and they have in principle agreed that as the framework for us to work on. We're now in a process of kind of mapping so we've mapped this against the Plymouth plan, and there's a strong overlap with the those themes and outcomes in the Plymouth plan and the framework. I'm now in the process of looking at all the other plans and action plans that are within the council, but also starting to work with our external partners to understand how people feel their work fits into this and how those hows can be implemented. Key in this is thinking about what some of the outcome actual measures or metrics will actually be for this piece of work, and what some of those actions will be that will inform how it's implemented. I think it's important that we note that this isn't a promise of extra funding or resource into the council or into the system. It's about understanding what those current actions are that we're already working on that link into this, and how perhaps we can optimise our working. And this has a strong overlap with some of the other pieces of work that are happening in the council at the minute, particularly thinking about that move into the kind of upstream and the prevention actual space. And again, with the metrics or measures, not thinking about having a whole new suite of new things we're going to measure, thinking about what are the existing things that we're looking at or able to capture that feed into our understanding of how well, as a whole system, we're achieving these outcomes. Thank you. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Chair, that sounds massive, and it is. I think you'll remember, because you did the first version of the Plymouth plan, that this is really complicated, and it was always intended the Plymouth plan would be taken out as a system-wide approach, and we've not managed to do that yet in any big, meaningful way. There's bits being done in terms of Councillor Drysdale and the green-blue environment, but we are purposefully taking time to do this in order that we're talking about how Plymouth is able to act and what that looks like. As we do that, we're increasingly seeing the complexity that Nick's just described, which means that we're now beginning to think about how do we, this isn't going to be a paper report. We're likely to say, we will give you a link to something that is online where you can begin to see all these interrelationships, links back to strategies, but also a sense of what everyone else is doing. Because if I think of my ward, if you think of all of yours, there are lots of community groups that aren't dependent on us for funding, but are doing things that change people's future opportunity. And actually, people understanding that, people understanding where they link to others is really important. So we're taking our time. If it isn't done by early summer next year and we need to go to autumn, am I going to be crying? No, I'm not. Because if in doing that, we take more people with us on the journey, that's really important. So I just wanted you to know this is an update. We've got future steps there, but we are going to be taking this really seriously. What I think is really encouraging is that a lot of our partners are also taking this seriously. And so whilst we're not setting targets in the economic strategy, and I was with the growth panel last week, and I was with the growth board a couple of weeks before that, we were talking about their targets in the growth in the economic strategy of reducing poverty by 3,000 people in the city. That's really hard and fast, and it's linked to economics. But there's potentially a whole lot more in this. So that's just the big overarching. We'll happily come back again. I'd suggest maybe not next time, but another meeting, but happy to answer questions in the meantime, because I know some of you also interact with us on the Cabinet Advisory Group on Child Poverty.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Nick. One of the things that you touched on that I find increasingly difficult is we talk about opportunity, child poverty, bringing people up. You've only got to turn on the news where these big banks, etc., are closing at a rate of knots, putting stress on people as in communities that may not be able to afford a taxi fare to go from Devonport to the city centre for a bank. You also hear, and it was good for you to say that our partners are taking this seriously, because one of the key issues that we've got, and you talked about it, is when services are not happening from the NHS in the community now, and they're being, you're having to go from, I use my ward as an example because I know quite a lot about it, but when you're having to go from Devonport to Derriford, which is, there is one bus now that runs 7 days a week, and I want to publicly thank Councillor Stevens for introducing that. But these are things that are gonna make the difference. And I just wonder, for example, will go to the bank. You know, what input, how are they being held accountable for the decisions that they're making that are making people's lives more difficult, more troubled, and actually in the long term costing residents money? It's already fine us having our own council strategy, but actually these other people are making such a difference to ordinary people's lives with their cost-cutting exercises. And I just wonder how we tackle that.
If I pick that one up first, it might have some practicalities. I think you're right, and this is really difficult. We have talked recently about Team Plymouth, the whole Devonport deal, the difference that will make in terms of just sheer numbers of people in the city and businesses in the city, which will change some of the demands. I'm also conscious, if we look at banks, Councillor Hayden has been working to look at and see where public libraries can at times be spaces that are used by banks as well. So where banks are saying they can't afford permanent premises, we're looking at how we step in with some of our infrastructure. If we look at the NHS, the reorganisation means they're coming to neighbourhood. We're still questioning whether neighbourhoods are really 30 to 50,000 people, because that seems a bit big for us. But if they're going to have to plan services at a neighbourhood level of that, that's going to change the dynamic. And in fact, the work that the council has done with the NHS on the CDC and the dental provision in town is actually already acknowledging some of that. So we're already stepping in to some of those breaches. I think part of what this will do is give us a much stronger citywide evidence base that can equip our MPs to do their work on some of that national stuff. But also, as the government is bringing forward its own approaches to tackling child poverty, we'll be able to say, not only are we looking at it and building evidence, but here's something we're doing practically in Plymouth, because we all know that government likes some of those quick wins and they're looking for some of the oven-ready projects. And if we've got some of those in pipeline because we've done some of this work, we're gearing Plymouth organisations up to be part of that. So big picture, that's that. I don't know, Nick, where you might have picked up stuff in your early conversations with people.
Yes, thank you. I think, yeah, there isn't much I want to add to that. I do recognise these as, and for us in public health, these upstream things like access to services, those transfer, and you mentioned about the bus, and we know that lots of our particularly outlying actual communities in Plymouth do have transport issues. You know, it is hard to get, and it's hard to get between places in Plymouth. You know, often it's more than the one bus. I went out to one of our hubs out in the Southway, and it takes a long time to get there on public transport, and people did often talk about those issues on access to banks and stuff. I think that we are, as a council, we're in a kind of limited position about how much we can impose what we think on some of these larger actual businesses. I think what we can do is start to have some of those. I think where this helps is helping people across the council and across the wider actual system to start to think about what the impact of their work, of their services, of their of their policies is on poverty and on that experience of people living in Plymouth. And there are things that, although we cannot necessarily directly impact on those bigger businesses, there are things we are able to do, like the banking hubs, that we could, if we're thinking about it, then those sorts of things can start to come into the conversation. And we're obviously really keen for any of the councillors to be kind of involved in those sorts of conversations and to bring those concerns of people in their areas and help to drive those conversations. And with my kind of aim with some of the engagement work now that we have the framework is trying to bring those sorts of issues into conversation, start to think about how we do our work impacts on those outcomes. And I think it's definitely, particularly if, again, from a public health perspective, there are opportunities for us to have input into how the NHS neighbourhoods actually develops, to make sure that actually some of these principles are embedded into that the NHS is thinking about some of these things as they actually write their plans. And we do have quite strong links across the council into some of those wider organisations.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That's what I was trying to get at, you know, that we need to get into these people to make them aware of the decisions that they're making and the impact that these decisions are making. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cogan. Good to see you in the chair. Through you, may I ask, certainly Councillor Penberthy, you know, it's a very important work and it's cross-party, and we want to tackle poverty of all nature and description in the city. You alluded to some extent, Councillor Coker, that some of this is top-down, so nationally down to us, and we've got an impending budget, as we're all aware. You know, much speculation about the impact, but clearly there's an opportunity for the government to try and tackle poverty of all descriptions in the budget. I see you, Councillor Penberthy, through you, Chair, as our chief advocate in this area for Plymouth City Council, notwithstanding we have the leader of the council, but for this particular piece of work. And I think it's important that even though this policy is evolving, that in the meantime you advocate for improved resources for those in poverty in the city of Plymouth. So what are you doing between now and the budget and after the budget, before this comes back and hopefully is fully approved by the council, to continue and champion those in most need in this city, and realising actually many of the things we want to aspire here to reduce and minimise poverty? What are you doing in the next few weeks up until the budget and beyond to try and advocate the policies that will have most effect on those that we're talking about today in this item? Thank you, Chair.
I think there's actually a whole load of us doing a whole load of stuff around that, because it's not all quick fixes. You might have spotted Councillor Evans was in London yesterday talking about reopening the rail links between Plymouth and Tavistock, and the whole issue of a Plymouth Metro. That's about supporting people's transport links to support employment, access to education and skills and other things. That's all part of the lobbying we're doing at the moment. We have the city's offers and asks, which when we're engaging, we are continually pushing, but we're also doing a lot of work through the LGA, making sure that we feed those into LGA discussions as well, because the power of the LGA is it's not just us saying it, it's not just our MPs saying it, we're also doing a lot. So, you know, one of the bits we're continually pushing on is, can we have consistent annual increases to the local housing allowance, because that makes an enormous difference to anyone who is dependent on benefits, and that's not just people out of work, people involved in sickness, universal credit top-ups for people in employment as well as older people. That makes a difference to what property they can afford to rent. That makes a difference to landlords in the city, because they know that they can rent with confidence. So all of those sorts of bits. So there are lots of things we are doing. There are those bits that are public, there are those bits that are behind the scenes, and obviously some of those bits that are within parties that I'm not going to talk about in public, as you'll understand. I think it would be fair to say that whilst I wave this banner, Jemima Lang is waving this banner, Mary Aspinall is waving this banner, Sudan is waving this banner. You know, I could go through the cabinet, we're all waving this banner about all of the interconnectivities that actually drive not only growth in Plymouth, but inclusive growth in Plymouth, and ways in which we support people, both through mitigations, but also those bits that support people to help themselves out of poverty. It's why we're really, you know, the work that Councillor Cresswell is doing on the skills agenda, you know, the Connect to Work money we've secured in the city, this is all part of it. So we've been working on it and we'll continue to, and I'm sure there will be bits in the budget we would like to see different, and we will continue to do both the public bits and the private bits to make a change to that at national level and with our MPs. So, you know, rest assured, we're pushing on lots and lots of fronts as hard as we can. The Devonport deal, Homes England deal, Newtown's potential, you know, there are lots of big bits where we've got government eyes on us and they're saying they want us to help us solve this problem. And that, I think, is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you through you to Councillor Penberthy. That's very welcome. I think it'd be useful for this panel, though, if you potentially could just supply a summary of what actually you think, you know, that the ask of government, particularly around the budget. It'd be useful to know what you're actually asking for, because, you know, I accept a lot goes on behind the scenes, but I think the public at large, and certainly I as an opposition councillor, would find it very useful for a summary of the key points that you think government should address in the budget. And could I just ask one further supplementary point to Councillor Penberthy on the child benefit cap? What's your view of government in relation to abolishing the two-child cap?
This is obviously a tricky one, but I actually thought that the work that Gordon Brown has done with think tanks was really quite interesting as to how that could be abolished and funded through a tax on online gambling. And we all know that online gambling is in itself a scourge. And so there is a way there to tackle some of the stuff that's being done to pay quite a large bill to tackle. I'd like to see that cap that was previously removed. As you know, Councillor Nicholson, when you take something out of the budget, it's really difficult to put it back in. You need to find a way to fund it. I thought that Gordon Brown and his colleagues across a whole range of organisations coming up with a proposition was a sensible one, and I would certainly back that. And if I had the opportunity to tell the Chancellor, I'd say you've got an opportunity here to do something good without doing harm. And there's not often those opportunities arise. So personal opinion is that I'm not afraid to put down my colours to the mast on that one.
That's it. So that's effectively, you would abolish it and it'd be funded through taxation on betting. Is that the
Specifically on online betting.
online betting? I only
which
say
is-
that because people that are watching this online won't necessarily know Gordon Brown's proposals. So thank you very much.
But
Councillor
that's the
Penberthy.
headline of what is quite a complex set of proposals. But I think it was a sensible proposal and one that wouldn't hit the ordinary taxpayer in terms of solution. So there you go, Councillor. I've given you a political statement that the Chancellor might not like.
Thank you very much. Chair, thank you.
Right, I've got one more question on this session, and that goes to Councillor Penrose.
Thank you, Chair. I do find this really encouraging and this whole approach very convincing, but I gather you are just beginning to think about the metrics and measures, and I find it quite hard to work out if you really are taking this broad approach and bringing all the existing plans and strategies in, how on earth you're going to select really useful measures, because as my understanding is, I may be wrong or not fully informed, but previous attempts by the Council on child action on poverty have sometimes faltered because of the failures of the metrics. So I just wondered if you could give us a clue about how you're progressing on the metrics and measures question.
I think the first thing is we don't want to create an industry, because it would be very easy to say we need a whole load of researchers to do the research to produce something. What we are aware of that is, if you look at the economic strategy, at Thrive, at the culture strategy, at Plan for Homes, at the skills strategy, they're all collecting a whole load of metrics. We won't want all of those. Once we've got the web portal, we might want to signpost to all of those. We'll probably want to pick some of the headlines. What we did previously on child poverty is identified 2 or 3 projects that we said we'd look at, and we sort of ignored the rest of the world. I don't think personally that is an approach we can go forward with. What we did do was we had a confidential dashboard of information that helped inform debate. Now, that dashboard included public information. It also involved information that hadn't yet been published and information provided by partners that was not published ever. And so it wasn't a publishable report. And what we're working at the moment as we look at all of this are, what are some of those key things that help us understand, and how can we present those in ways that there's a dashboard that everyone in the city can look at, that we can publish. So that isn't necessarily the metrics that we'd be saying, here are the headlines, but what is happening on the super run? What is free school meal take up? And what's that in the public domain? And what is it we collected locally that we haven't submitted yet as a return and the government haven't published? So we're looking at some of those. We're looking at what's our data, what's DWP data, what's voluntary community sector data, what's education data, and then seeing how we bring some of that into a dashboard that talks about the vulnerabilities in the city and how we begin to move out of those. So I think there's the bit that are, there are this many people attending these many courses, achieving this much qualification. This is the wage earning bit. This is the change in use of GPs or whatever it is that might be some of the headlines. But I think some of this stuff that is more tracking, luckily, there is growing consensus around doing some of this, and DWP are active in that conversation. We'll be taking that through the Cabinet Advisory Group on Child Poverty as we develop it, and bringing our initial proposals with the final framework, so that at least we can have something out there that will sit us alongside but maybe in a different place on the website. All the joint strategic needs analysis and neighbourhood and ward breakdowns that are there. So it's how we cut information through a different perspective that might begin to help highlight some of those areas where, oh look, there's a big gap here, no one's quite doing that bit. How do we come together as a city to meet that bit? Who goes to fund it? How do we get the partnerships in place so that it's not just about, oh, we've got some funding that we need, but actually there's a real purpose behind it. So we're being as measured with metrics and dashboards as we are with everything else. And I think that's something that not only public health, but others are saying is the appropriate journey to go on, rather than saying, here's the dashboard, here's the key metrics, now write a framework that meets them.
Thank you, Chris. Do you have a supplementary? Because then I'm going to...
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank Chris and Nick for being here today and updating us. The recommendation before us is for the Housing and Community Services Scrutiny Panel to note the ongoing work as part of the Building Bridges to Opportunity programme, and for this to be reported back to the panel before the framework is presented to Cabinet. So are members in agreement with that? Please show. Thank you. So that's all done. Thank you very much. We now move to item number 6, which is the homeless and rough sleepers update. This again is Councillor Penberthy, ably supported by Jackie Kings, our Head of Housing Solutions. So I'm not sure which one of you are going to, oh, and Matt Garrett. Sorry, Matt, I forgot you. You're not on my list. So whichever one of you wants to kick it off, please feel free to do so.
I'm going to kick it off, and also I'd like to invite Victoria Allen, who's the Chief Executive of Path, to join us, one of our key partners, just so that you can hear not just us, but a key partner in all of this delivery. The report speaks for itself. We continue to see a terrific pressure in terms of a housing crisis working through at the most extreme end in terms of homelessness in the city. The answer to this is to have more permanent housing available, and for most of the people involved in the really rough end of homelessness, that's more affordable housing. And the only way we're going to do that is by building it. And that is the answer we need. However, we've got the context there, we've got figures. Those figures show a really hard-working team. A team with an active caseload of over 1,000 households at any one time is an enormous demand on actually quite a small team. A team that work really closely in partnership with lots of organisations across the city, and without whom we wouldn't be able to operate. A growing temporary accommodation as opposed to pay-by-night accommodation market, and that just growing. Literally, the way we're keeping bed and breakfast numbers under control is by increasing the temporary housing market because we haven't got permanent housing. That isn't a long-term solution, but it's there, and we've got a whole load of work doing on that. And the changes to our approaches in terms of early intervention and prevention, the work we're doing on the ground with people who are rough sleeping, with people in hostels, with people who are floating in and out and around is really important. It's becoming increasingly nuanced, very trauma-informed, very individual cases. It's an enormous piece of work. Since this report was written, we've had another, I think, £868,000 worth of funding announced by government. This is predominantly going to be used over the next 12 months next year, with a very big focus on prevention work and gearing up the system to prevent, rather than doing lots of sticking plasters, because sticking plasters ain't the long-term solution. So really beginning to do a shift there. I think that's really good news, and I welcome that. I think at that point I'm going to stop. I'm sure with questions I'll pick up other bits. Jackie, you might want to give a bit of a quick overview from your perspective. And I think it'd be useful just to hear Victoria from Path, who are not only working on the ground doing leading our multi-agency work with rough sleepers, but also I think now housing over 150 people in temporary accommodation. So seeing the whole homelessness through to settled housing work happening, and I think that's really important for you to hear. So I'm passing over now to Jackie and then Victoria.
Thank you, Councillor Penberthy. Good afternoon. Just an overview really of building on what Chris has just said, in that the demand is significant and continues to grow at the moment. It isn't unique to Plymouth, it is a national challenge, and we're hearing about that on the news all the time. For that reason, and without the permanent housing currently in place at the moment, we're working significantly with partners. Any funding that comes in, we're working really creatively. Describes there the additionality of properties that have been brought into the system. You know, working with partners like BCHA, who are working with private landlords to bring additionality into the system at much lower cost to the local authority. BCHA and our partners at PATH working together to bring in additional homes through funding and bringing in their own capital at the same time to bring additionality. And the very important support alongside that, working with our social housing colleagues also on regeneration properties that we can use interim. So lots of creative solutions in place to try and address this. The overarching strategic view to this is held within the homelessness recovery programme, working across prevention, recovery, system support to really support straight across the whole piece of homelessness. And as Chris said, quite nuanced in the fact we are seeing lots more complexity in the people who are presenting to us, and lots more individual needs that are needing to be addressed, where we're really clear that HMO accommodation isn't able to meet people's needs, where they actually need the right type of accommodation to be able to move forward out of homelessness once we have permanent properties available. The homeless, as you can see in the paper, the homelessness recovery programme is straight across children and young people, single homeless families, meeting our safe accommodation duties under domestic abuse, and also trying to meet the needs of those who are presenting with disabilities. So accessible accommodation is another significant challenge. We've got plans in place across those immediate actions, not 6 months, 6 to 12 months and beyond. This isn't a short-term problem with a short-term fix. We are on at least a 10-year recovery out of this. Plans are being put in place to make sure that we've got incremented response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Welcome, Victoria. Is there anything you'd like to bring in at this moment in time?
Hi, yeah, just to echo really what Jackie was saying about this isn't just a challenge in Plymouth, it's a national challenge. And the way we're working across partners in Plymouth to creatively respond wherever we can, and that's right from working at the sharp end with people who are street homeless, right through to making sure that there's more housing and settled accommodation and more accommodation available at social rents. Also just like to mention about the integration with health and homelessness as well, and as Jackie mentioned, the complexities of some of the people we're seeing, particularly on the streets at the moment, and how we're working with health partners to address that, particularly with some of the new investment that's coming into the city. But also the private rented sector is absolutely part of the solution, and we're building up networks, making sure that we've got really strong partnerships with letting agents and private landlords to make sure that you know, we have tenancy support and that people are able to access the private sector here in Plymouth as well. So a lot of work happening, a lot of partnerships, and a lot of creativity really in responding to new investment as it comes into the city.
Matt, is there anything you want to say? No? Okay, I'm going to open it up for any questions from panel members. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, certainly Councillor Penberthy and the team have worked tirelessly to try and tackle what is a very, very difficult problem. And I think we need to recognise all those involved in being homeless or seeking housing. it's a tragic position to be in, because this local authority and nationally, our society is failing to meet the needs and demands of those that we have. So it is a very, very difficult position to be in. It's probably a bit similar to the last question. You know, lots of the complications government could try to tackle. And I was watching a programme on television a couple of nights ago around the really challenging whether the government could meet its target of building the number of houses that the Labour Party are saying, and really pouring scorn on the ability to meet that target. And we all know really inflationary pressures and the house builders, you know, they're not confident they can meet the housing numbers that the government wish to build. So in relation to the budget again that we're going to have in November, what message, Councillor Penberthy, would you be sending the government in terms of what change they can make? Because a lot of the problems in Plymouth is actually redeveloping brownfield sites, and the taxes or the taxation policies on brownfield compared to greenfield have been punitive, and therefore have meant that, you know, the long-awaited, and I'll congratulate on the start shortly of the Bath Street development. You know, that's been derelict for, what, 4 or 5 years? You know, years go so quickly, but it's been derelict for a long time. That could have had people in those houses years ago if government of the day had actually meant that actually it was cost effective to redevelop those sites. I still don't personally think that government's got it right, and I'm not being political that it's Labour. The last government didn't get it right. So is there a message from you to government again for the budget to actually get these things right and move us forward in Plymouth and across the country on some of these things that they can be too difficult? If there's a will, and the Secretary of State was heavily involved in the television programme, he wants to see houses built. Why doesn't the Treasury back the local government department in helping them build houses by changing some of the rules and regulations? So what's your message again to government on housing?
I think it's really interesting if you take those really long-term views and look backwards a long time. The times when we've had most house building in the country, it's not been led by the private sector. If we depend on the private sector now, we'd have almost nothing happening in the city. What we saw when I was at the growth panel last week was that actually where house building is happening in the city at the moment, it's being led by affordable. Post-war, where did we see, before we saw the private sector building the estates of Plimpton, we saw the public sector building the estates of Southway and Whitley and North Prospect and Efford and Devonport and Stonehouse. And actually, I would say that there is now a fear about the government borrowing for long-term infrastructure. Housing is long-term infrastructure. The transport and needs to support it are long-term infrastructure. New towns are one of the solutions, but actually giving more funding for RPs to build affordable housing at social rent would make an enormous difference. I personally would advocate for borrowing to do that, and I think we need to be taking some of the bulls by the horns and looking at some of the post-war investment in public services that now everyone says we shouldn't do because we shouldn't borrow. And we borrowed heavily then, and we rebuilt a country. I think actually we're now in a similar sort of crisis. I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I have no wish to be in Parliament, let alone to have her job. But that is an area I think would make a difference. The other thing is that would mean that we would need to train people to do jobs, to build the houses, and maybe slightly controversially, we'd need to look at where that workforce came in the short term as well as the long term. And that might mean that we can't get so afraid about saying that we need skills to come from overseas to help us to do the things we need to rebuild our nation. And I'm not going to be apologising about that, because we do need that as well. That would be one of my key messages. The other key message at the moment would be look at the local housing allowance, because if people's rent is more than their entire universal credit payment, they're not going to be able to afford the rent. And actually, if the people on universal credit, that's a top up for their employment, how on earth are they meant to feed their children too? I do think that we should be seeing local housing allowance moving back towards 50% of local rental values. I think that would make a massive difference. Both of those are big budget tickets, and people say we need to cut the welfare state and cut borrowing. So I would disagree with the pressures that the Chancellor and the government from all parties is under to change that should be changed, because those are the big things. I would welcome the investment in Bath Street. I would welcome the investment in the Civic Centre. I would welcome the investment in the master planning for a new town in the city centre. I would welcome the Homes England investment in buying land in order to start enabling that to happen and working with us on it. So we've got some things we can tick box. We need to put a bit of an accelerator underneath it, and that accelerator needs to be funding. It's no good us waiting for Persimmon and Bartlett and Wimpy and all those others to start building housing that won't meet our needs when we need to start building the housing that will. If we could get 4,000 people off the waiting list now, we'd probably find that we could house the rest of the 4,000 people left on the waiting list in the properties that were left behind by the move, and it would totally change the environment in Plymouth. What we don't want to build is an estate of 4,000 affordable housing units with nothing else. So how we build those mixed and sustained communities is really important. I totally back Steve Reed. I think it's a really tough target, but sometimes you have to set tough targets to change the market. And this is one where let's directly intervene in the market. I would hasten to say that planning departments need to come under the cosh of, so out from under the cosh. Our planning department has agreed thousands and thousands and thousands of homes to be built that developers can't be bothered to bring forward. And sorry, just saying let's approve more developments isn't going to solve that problem. Let's actually build out the developments. We've already 6,000 new homes in Plymouth. What would that mean for the private sector, for private rented sector, and for the affordable sector? You know, let's stop blaming planners, let's stop blaming local authorities, and let's start investing.
Just a quick supplementary, and thank you very much, Councillor Pemberthy, for a very full response. So why do you think the government is scapegoating planning authorities? And as someone who's worked very heavily, like the chair with the planning department, we have an excellent planning department. They're not all the same across the country, but you know, casting an aspersion that the fault lay in the planning departments of local authorities is a complete nonsense. And it's something I hope you'll pass to government, both publicly and privately, to stop doing it.
I have had lots of those conversations. I think that actually Plymouth does have a very good planning department. Sadly, that isn't replicated everywhere. I can't comment on the peer reviews that Councillor Stevens might have done, or your own links to the local government association and what other local councils are doing. Not every council has got the sort of planning department we've got. We might not like all their decisions, but actually they do make sure that we get approvals for lots of housing, lots of employment sites, and lots of leisure, amenity and recreation facilities in the city. They're doing their bit, and sadly, not everyone has a planning department like ours. I have made that case, I've argued the case, and I will continue to do so when I see ministers and pin them in a corner. Sadly, I didn't go to a Labour Party conference this year. I will be going to the local government conference in February, and I will be making sure that I pin ministers to the walls then and have those conversations.
Thank you. Councillor Penrose.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated this report, because it showed that despite these amazing challenges, you're sort of thinking all the time about what new ways you can do it, and particularly in prevention. But then you say there are more complexities, and I just wondered how it is that there are more complexities when we've been dealing with this problem for so many years. What are the things that come in intersection that make it so difficult?
I think this is really one for especially Victoria, but
Yes,
also
yes,
I think Jackie to pick up on.
We're seeing people with more complex health needs, particularly around mental health. We're seeing more people with neurodivergence. And I think this is a symptom of many, many years of cuts to public services and people not being able to access the healthcare in the community that they need. And that's what our teams are dealing with every day on the streets at the moment. Our teams are being put in the position of perhaps, you know, without the training, without the recognition, you know, having to offer mental health support and help people into health pathways wherever they can. It's hard for anyone to access a GP appointment at the moment. That's even harder if you don't have a roof over your head. So I'd say from the very coalface, that's what we're dealing with.
Just to how are they bearing up? As you're saying, they're dealing with all these additional challenges. Are they managed?
Yeah, we're always looking at support for our team, so they do have clinical supervision. We work in close partnership with Live Well, who are providing that for frontline teams at the moment, and the Health Inclusion Pathway and HIP. But with the new investment, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a completely integrated health and homelessness approach, where we're bringing on more mental health specialist workers, more occupational therapists who are working with people who are street homeless, supporting the people who use our services, but also supporting the staff and the teams.
Thank you.
Can I just come in there? I visited our teams. I do not frequently. I don't want to take away from their work, and it's not my job to manage them, but I do go in every now and then and visit. I am amazed by the work that they do. They're on tape, so they're on the front desk 2 or 3 days a week. They don't palm off to another team member that first contact. They are that person's caseworker. Some team members can be working with up to 70 or so different clients at any one time, and that is an enormous thing. And we are talking about how we find alternative accommodation rather than the current site at Derry's Cross, because we need better space for our teams. We're looking continually at support for them, and that's right through the levels. And I know Jackie has had to spend time with senior staff members in partners. I spend time with people, actually sometimes just being a listening ear, but the whole system is under an enormous amount of pressure every single day. And it's one of our jobs to look after people, and we're always looking at what we can do more. But, you know, I have utmost admiration for everyone, whether that be the teams I meet here, the people I see at the George Hostel when I pop in there every week or two, on the front desk, not the senior managers, the people there on stuff. Yesterday I met with the chief exec and regional director of Bournemouth Churches to talk to them, to check they're okay. So that continual checking in, and then looking at what more we can do. But you know, to make it easier, we'd have to invest a whole load more in a lot more staff. And I wish we had the luxury of being able to give our staff more time to do what they really want to do, which is to try and solve the problems, and support people to make those next steps. And actually, that isn't a do it this week, do it this month. Victoria sent me a case study earlier that was someone we've been working with for the best part of a decade to get to them being able to sustain a long-term home. And that's the sort of work that we're now engaged in. And as politicians, that's not the sort of thing we'd normally want to do, because it's not the shiny opening. But we're here saying, let's stand alongside people for the long term. So something we're all involved in, but it is, you're right, it is one of those points that we have to look after. So if we don't look after our own people, they're not able to look after everyone else.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a question, I think, probably best for Jackie. Jackie, we talk about the number of households that are coming to seek advice. Are we finding that's citywide? Are we finding a higher proportion in certain areas and certain backgrounds? Because we just get a number here. So I wondered whether there was any trend in where people are applying from or seeking help and support from.
Thanks, Councillor Coker. I wouldn't want to give you statistics off the top of my head. It's something that we could actually look at and pin down. We all know the demographics of Plymouth, so it'll come as no surprise that the majority of the applications tend to come from the more deprived areas where they face bigger challenges. We also have more densely populated areas of private sector accommodation, rented accommodation. Our biggest reason for presentation of homelessness is Section 21. Obviously, we've got Renters' Rights Bill coming, so, you know, we're hoping to see some changes, but that obviously, when you push it one place, it comes out the other, so there'll be some other consequences on that as well. The other reasons we see for, the other top two reasons are fleeing domestic abuse and breakdown of family relationships. That's often where people have already moved in together and it's not sustainable. So all of which also speak a little bit to the prior question from Councillor Penrose there, that you're going to have additional complexity where that occurs. So in a nutshell, without the actual statistic in front of me, that is what I would suggest.
Yeah, I think some of the members, certainly I would be interested in a kind of overarching kind of where the people are presenting and whether it's, you can then see why or understand where the issues are coming from. So I think I would certainly like that, if you could do that for, you don't need to come to us, but if you could compile something and then send it to members, and if we've got any questions going forward, I think that would be a really good thing to do.
Could I suggest that we add it into our next report? We come back every 6 months, so we'll be back in 2 meetings' time. We'll add it in as a section of the report in 2 meetings' time. That will give us time, without putting additional pressure on the team, to make sure we've got the figures and tested them before we just circulate them.
Yeah, I'm happy for that, but I'm not the official chair. I'm only sitting in today. Okay, I did have Councillor Dingle, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe that the council brought the Royal Building in the city centre last October to use as temporary accommodation. I was just wondering if there was any update on what's currently happening with that. Thank you.
Thanks. So this was a question I was sort of expecting because it has been in the press recently. So I'm going to read you something because that way I get everything I want to get out, but I'm not going to provide any further amplification at this point. And by the time I get to the end, you'll understand why. So since we purchased the Royal Building, and that was almost a year-long process, several things have happened that have changed the landscape of temporary housing provision in Plymouth. With our partners, we were successful in bidding for a total of £6,436,016 worth of capital money from the Local Authority Housing Fund 3 and the Supported Housing Accommodation Programme, with an additional £2,867,185 of revenue funding to support residents living in these. LAF 3 supported the delivery of 11 temporary accommodation units. SHAP is supporting the delivery of 74 temporary accommodation units. At the same time, we've supported partners to deliver an additional 70 or more units of temporary accommodation at no cost to the council. All of these schemes needed to be delivered on tight funding timetables, and this meant we had to balance priorities to ensure successful completion and all of that external investment coming into the city. Whilst doing all of this, we've also developed our recently announced housing partnership with Bournemouth Churches Housing Association, which will deliver 22 units of temporary accommodation, as well as 39 general needs homes as the starting point. This will bring a forecast £18,300,000 worth of external investment into the city at a cost to the Plan for Homes capital programme of £1 million. In total, this is over 180 additional temporary accommodation units now being delivered or in the pipeline, with over £9 million worth of investment from sources outside the council, excluding that work with Bournemouth Churches Housing Association. I'm sure you'll agree that that's actually game-changing, and it is an amazing achievement by our officers and partners. In the meantime, we have been taking and working through building surveys and looking at the standard of the Royal Building with partners. We're sense checking what the priority accommodation mix that is now needed in light of all of that should be for the building. And so we will be ready to move forward on next stages over the coming weeks, but we need to complete that bit of work first in the light of all of that other stuff that we've been doing since we started the purchase process for the Royal. So really happy to give you that update, but I'm sure you'll understand within that we're not quite ready yet to say what comes next, but I think that gives a fuller picture than we've been able to give to date, in part because of the discussions we've been having and finalising over the last few weeks.
Thank you. No? And the final question for you, you'll be pleased to know, is from Councillor Poyser.
Thank you, Chair. Question for, I think, either Jackie or Victoria. No one likes to see rough sleeping. No, I think, no one likes the thought of people living in temporary accommodation or in B&Bs. how can the people of Plymouth help and support the council and its partners in its work that it's doing? Is there ways in which people can contribute in some way that can assist, like the council's role and the partner's role?
If I kick off first while others gather their thoughts, I think the first thing is to exercise some compassion. Would you rather see someone sleeping with no cover or with cover? I might find tents not aesthetically pleasing in some settings, but I'd rather someone was dry and warm than sleeping in the rain. I think don't assume that someone who is begging is homeless, or someone who is drunk or under the influence of other substances on the street are homeless. There are differences and there are complexities in all of that. But, you know, support people where you can. Don't be afraid to have a conversation. People aren't ogres. If you want to give money, and I know lots of people do, I would suggest that there are some reputable, and these aren't the only ones, but there are some reputable charities in the city who will use donations really well. The obvious ones in terms of working with rough sleepers, I would suggest, would be Path, Shekinah, and the Soup Run. If you want to volunteer, getting involved in the Soup Run is a really easy way, and you don't have to do that every week at the same time. Join one of the existing teams or support other people to do so. There are other charities, but those are three I would recommend as key partners with ourselves. But, you know, be compassionate and just have a little bit of thought. I get emails that just say, please just take the tents away and remove the people and hose down the spaces. I'm sorry, I'm not going to treat people with that lack of compassion. I will work to support our organisations. But there's my thoughts as a political lead, but that will have given Jackie and Victoria a chance to sort of put together, maybe ask from their organisations and partners' perspectives.
Yeah, just totally agree in terms of compassion. There's also signposting. So if you go to the Path website, there's a section about homelessness and how people can help. And that gives some information about the organisations that are out there. There's the StreetLink referrals. So the StreetLink website, if somebody sees someone rough sleeping and is concerned, they can log the details on the website. My team will pick that up and we'll be out there first thing in the morning visiting that site and ensuring that person is supported. But absolutely compassion, saying hello to people, smiling, making people feel seen is really important. And the three organisations that Councillor Penberthy mentioned, absolutely, we're about to launch our winter appeal in Path, and I know Shekinah and the Soup Run will be doing the same, and volunteering as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. I can't really add to that. It says it all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that, ladies and gentlemen. That was really quite insightful, and I hope that one of the messages that does come out across to everybody is compassion. I think that's really, really important. So what I've got in front of me, and I need to put my glasses on, to note the progress made in addressing homelessness and rough sleeping pressures, to endorse ongoing actions to address homelessness with compassion, resilience, and impact. And I would like to add the third one that we spoke about earlier, to bring a report to a future panel meeting on the breakdowns of households approaching council for housing advice as to where and why. Okay. Are members happy with that?
I can just add one point. It might be something Councillor Penberthy agrees to in his subsequent report, but the results of the budget might have implications for housing. So could we either add a recommendation, or if Councillor Penberthy could commit to bring something in the future, that'd be really useful.
Very happy to do that. As I said, we would have put an extra 868,000 in this report had the announcement not come after we'd written it. We will always give you the latest 6 months worth of activity, okay, and we will give you some analysis on what that means.
Thank you. So can I just put the vote that we all note that and the recommendations, please? Thank you. between myself and the temporary chair and vice chair, we would like to propose a change to the order of business to bring item 8, the Renters' Rights Bill, up the agenda so that we can consider all of the items relating to Councillor Penberthy's portfolio in one go to save him coming out and coming back.
Well, he doesn't need a rest.
Yeah. So if there's no objections, we'll move straight to item number 8, which is the Renters' Rights Bill. As I said, it's Councillor Penberthy will introduce the item, supported by David Irving, Strategic Programmes Lead, Housing Standards Community Connections. And if I've got that wrong, I apologise. So, Councillor Penberthy, over to you.
Thank you. And it's interesting that with one slight tweak of a word, before the last general election, we were talking about the Renters Reform Bill. There were not substantive changes between the Renters Reform Bill and the Renters Rights Bill, but it is a massive piece of work. It's a major reform in the private rented sector. The technicalities, the bill is in 4 parts, and the council, along with every other council, faces new statutory duties that we will have to carry out. Whilst the bill is currently still being debated in Parliament, we can be certain that it will be phased in. Parts 1 and 4 will be introduced first, with parts 2 and 3 coming at later dates. We anticipate, I think, parts of 1 and 4 coming in within 6 months to 2 years on different parts of it, parts 2 and 3, between them taking up to 10 years to fully implement. Key changes include tenancy reform and the abolition of Section 21 evictions, ensuring tenants can no longer be removed without cause, the introduction of rent controls, a ban on rental bidding, protection against discriminatory practices, and new grounds for possession which are fairer for all. Enhanced enforcement powers for local authorities, with the ability to issue a civil penalty of up to £7,000 for initial or minor offences, and where serious, persistent or repeat non-compliance, a civil penalty of up to £40,000 can be issued. A new private rented sector database and landlord ombudsman to improve transparency and accountability. The extension of the Decent Home Standards and AWAB's law to the private sector, setting clear expectations for property safety and quality. That's a massive amount of work, and we've been taking a proactive approach, which is why we've got David sitting here. We've completed a legislative gap analysis, mapped stakeholders, begun reviewing policies, and established that strategic programme lead post to coordinate delivery. We're participating in national and regional workshop groups, including co-chairing the Southwest Operational Delivery Forum, Operation Jigsaw. Our housing standards team is leading preparations, supported by legal, housing solutions and trading standards, because all of those will have different bits of the enforcement powers. We've begun pilot testing IT systems and are developing training programmes to ensure readiness. In fact, Matt and I were with Southwest Landlords Association at lunchtime talking about exactly that, in order that the private rented sector is in the loop and we're making sure we're working really closely to support them. However, challenges do remain. The private rented sector represents 22.7% of Plymouth's housing stock, yet currently our staffing levels fall significantly short of what will be needed. We await confirmation of new burdens funding, and our IT systems may require further development to meet future reporting requirements once those become clear. Despite these pressures, our commitment is clear: to deliver a robust, fair and effective implementation of the Renters' Rights Bill that protects tenants, supports responsible landlords and strengthens public confidence in our enforcement role. I hasten to say that good landlords should have nothing to fear from enforcement, but those people who are breaking the rules, we will have to come down tougher than we have before. We don't want, I know they're called rogue landlords, it makes them sound a bit colourful. Actually, criminal landlords, we don't want them in the city. And that is, we will have more powers, but that is going to come at quite a lot of work still to do. The conversations we've had, and I've been talking to some of my counterparts, We were way ahead of the game in identifying that this was going to be a potential risk to the council. We have moved fast, and we're in there on lots of the key discussions because we've already had thinking. So the work that Dave Ryland did, and pay tribute to him in the work he did on this before he moved to Plymouth Community Homes, sadly missed, and David is now doing, has been really important in getting us there, getting us that reputation, and we do intend to be one of the councils that showcases how to do this right, and we're being prepared. So we're bringing you this paper now, rather than suddenly the legislation's there and we're on a massive roller coaster with everything going fast and us trying to do it. We just wanted to show you that we are on top of things, so that as things start to move fast, you understand why they are starting to go fast, and why we will have all sorts of stuff beginning to change, so that you have that opportunity to see. In effect, it's not a pre-decision scrutiny, but it's a pre-action scrutiny. So I don't know whether Dave or Matt have anything to add before we take any questions.
Yeah, there's not a lot to add, Councillor Penberthy, other than to say we know that this is having an effect on the market, so we know landlords are reacting to the changes that they don't fully know what's going to happen yet. We know the bones of it, but so we know there's a change. As Councillor Penberthy said, we met with South West Landlords Association. The national figure at the moment is about 19% of the private rented sector landlords selling up and leaving the market. That will have an impact on the city, but what we know is that good landlords in general will stay. So we're hopeful that with all of these measures, it will be about getting and dealing with criminal landlords rather than the good landlords.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Any questions from the panel? That doesn't happen very often, does it?
Chair, not a question, but I think it's a minor but a significant point. I raise it because I have declared on my register of interest that I'm president of Gables Dogs and Cats Home, but it's good to see that tenants would have a right to actually ask the landlord to accept a pet, obviously on the basis of insurance. And I think that's quite a significant thing for those of us who have passion about animals and the impact that the housing crisis is having on animals. You know, we're obviously first and foremost, we're here to ensure people are looked after, but clearly there's a knock-on impact. So that's a good part of the bill that hopefully will come into legislation.
Yeah, and just if we were to think about people who have been long-term homeless, especially those long-term homeless street sleepers, quite often an animal will be a key companion, and not having the ability to get a temporary accommodation solution that allows for an animal as well will keep people on the street, because they are not going to be parted normally from a dog, occasionally a cat, but those people who need support, we can't take away their support mechanisms in order to provide them somewhere to stay. So I think that sort of thing is really fair, and I too welcome it. I'm not particularly someone who spends a lot of time with animals, but I can understand people's attachment to them, and I think that is another good pragmatic move that is about supporting, as we heard in Plymouth. Well, it's actually more than this. It's not just the 22% of the private rented sector. It's another 30% or so of the city population who lives in affordable housing. You know, over half the city's population will now have the right to have a pet, rather than the ability to beg to have a pet.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions? Mine is not a question, Chris. Mine is, so when are we going to be presented with the finer details? I know it's all dependent on when it gets passed, but have we got any kind of timescales so that you can come back to us? Because this is going to be a big change out there for people, and people will be looking at people in this room to be able to tell them, well, this is what is now or what isn't, and we just need some idea.
We're waiting to see the passage of the bill. I think the understanding is that bizarrely, we might have one sticking point between the Lords and the Commons, which if it can be resolved between the next reading in the Commons, means it won't need to bounce back to the Lords. And bizarrely, that's on if someone is evicting a tenant in order to sell a property, the period of time between eviction and sale, whether it's 6 months, 9 months or 12 months. Well, if that's the only sticking point, hopefully civil servants and politicians can get that resolved and it can move forward. If that's the case, we could have royal assent within 2 or 3 weeks. If not, it could be 5 to 8. So that's to royal assent. We understand we then get a 6-month window, but that's not a very long window. And then some things will start. The database is about 2 years away from royal assent. The duty on us, the requirement to enforce comes into point as soon as that 6 months is over. We will be doing work that is preparatory. So at some point, probably within the next month, expect an executive decision that updates our HMO licensing, our electrical safety and our civil proceedings and civil penalties stuff, purely to enable us to be able to move it forward with another incremental move if necessary. And there will be other bits like that that we will be bringing out in the short term. And there will be other bits. Now, what we wanted to bring this here was that we don't want to say, well, we've got something, we need to take it to a scrutiny panel, which means we can't do it in time. So we will try and keep you briefed as we go. Some of the stuff, in fact, although it starts coming in, will have less impact immediately on the stuff you see and will be more about how we minimise the potential for judicial review, because there will be some organisations seeking to judicial review us in order to test the bill. And we, like every other council, will be seeking to minimise that. We are part of the pilot for the database. So there are a number of landlords in Plymouth who are already beginning to register and upload their properties. We were hearing some of that information this morning, but it's not all of them. And once we know that, actually, the key landlords within South West Landlords Association are all involved in that pilot. Some of the really tech-savvy ones are also involved, as well as those who are not using any tech. So we're doing that. So we've got some learned experience. We're talking to the MHCLG about comms processes. So what they're doing on comms, what we do on comms, how we do things. So as we get that, we'll come, but that might well be an email update to members generally, rather than us coming through scrutiny. I'm not sure at the moment that we have new major policies that we will have to bring in. It'll be more tweaking what we've got. If we do get to that point where we realise there's a new thing we need to bring in, we will make sure that that gets properly advertised. But until we've got dates and actually some of the statutory guidance and timetables that come after royal assent, it's a bit difficult for us to tell, which is why we wanted to actually reassure you that we're on top of the process, because we don't know quite what the sausage machine of MHCLG will chuck out of us once the King signs the bit of paper.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure what that was. Okay, so thank you very much, gentlemen. It just goes to, for me to say that the recommendation is that the Housing and Community Services Scrutiny Panel note the report. So I'm sure everybody's happy with noting that report. And thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. We are back on, we're back on time. I am going to offer a 5-minute recess for anyone that wants to go to, sorry, Councillor Stevens, was that an objection? A 5-minute recess, so that if anyone wants to visit the facilities, they can do. Thank you. Okay, welcome back from our 5-minute refreshment break. We now move on to item number 7, and just for the minutes, Councillor Allinson has had to go. So we move to the agenda, which is city centre car parking, which I believe the chair specifically wanted to bring to the panel. So let me welcome Councillor John Stevens, the Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning and Transport, accompanied by Andy Sharp, who's the Acting Interim Director. I got that right, didn't I? And Mike Arthurton, our Parking and Marine Manager. So I've been told, Councillor Stevens, you want to introduce this report, so it's over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Coker. Good afternoon, everyone. The briefing paper that you've had provides insights into our ongoing efforts on the landscape of city centre parking. As our city undergoes significant growth and transformation, it is essential to adapt our transportation infrastructure and parking provisions to meet the needs of residents, businesses and visitors. Today's report provides an update on the progress since Scrutiny's last report about this in November 24, focusing on key areas of our car parking services. We highlight the essential role of car parking services, the essential role the car parking services play in supporting the delivery of key public services, update on utilisation, and the summary outcome of a previous demand and utilisation analysis commissioned from WSP on future growth and demand. We are excited to update you on our collaboration with Homes England and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to develop a detailed master plan for the city centre. And this master plan will assess the impacts of growth and the commitment to building new homes on the transport network and parking. It aims to enhance our understanding of demand and inform the creation of an integrated transport and parking strategy. We're also proud of our long-standing partnership with our public transport providers. The report sets out how we are continuing to support the viability of our public transport services and events across the city. Our commitment to sustainability and carbon reduction is evident in our investment in electric vehicle charging facilities. The report details our efforts to install EV chargers in city centre car parks and provides updates on assessments conducted to ensure the safety and structural integrity of these facilities, considering the increased weight of electric vehicles. And finally, the report sets out how we are actively working to improve the customer's experience in our city centre car parks and of our accessibility initiatives, such as the introduction of wider parking bays and dedicated spaces for individuals with hidden disabilities. So that's the introduction to the report, and our officers present will be happy to contribute to your information.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Andy, Mike, is there anything you want to say at this stage, or do you just want me to go into questions? Questions. Councillor Nicholson to start, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple, if I may. If I could start on the sort of one of the more technical points that. Thank you very much indeed for the report, and thank you, Councillor Stevens, for the introduction. On the demand lower than availability, you've got a number of quite important car park locations. Do you think that's been affected by the public realm improvements and the general perception that the public has that the city centre is not a place to go at the moment because there's so much building work? And I'll be honest, there is so much. Having walked around it the other day, it's hard to avoid any sort of areas, so it's not subject to construction. So do you think that's had an impact on, some of those that you would expect to have sort of a lot more demand than you've currently got?
I just add to an observation, and they'll let Mike come in with some detailed information. I would rather walk around a city centre with some chaos and growth going on there than a city centre without. So inevitably, as things develop, there will be a situation of how are people going to get into town. But notice in the report from last year, I know we were part of the public realm developments then. The observation is pretty similar, but I'd leave Mike get on, about the actually information that he'd have over trends.
Thanks, Councillor. The comment I'd make is that in including this information, I was actually a bit apprehensive because actually it's largely the same as the last report you've seen, where the car parks actually demonstrate a consistent behaviour. So we've not seen any reductions, and what's not covered in this report, but what I can say is we're actually observing growth in some areas. But in terms of what you're seeing here, really, I think the car parks just reflect the kind of established purpose and type of visitor that uses those car parks, which continues to be consistent.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the officers. Thank you for that. And the second point I wanted to raise, and it probably, well, it does link to some extent with what you just said, Mike, because I think all of us want to see a regenerated city centre, one that attracts people to come into the city for a destination. And you and I, from a planning policy perspective, have sought for a number of years to try and make it a destination, not purely just a retail sector. And it is recognised that Plymouth really has too big a city centre for the population and the retail trade sort of now and moving forward. I did want to pick up, and I would suggest you've conflated in some ways the ask of the committee in relation to car parking usage and really the redevelopment of the city centre and the master planning work. I'll give notice. I will struggle to endorse the first recommendation, which is to endorse the strategy with Homes England and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, based on, I don't think enough information has been given. I've pretty much relied on what I've read in the media in terms of what Plymouth City Council is proposing for the city centre. And clearly for the Cabinet member and the officers present, in relation to the impact on car parking, it would appear, reading what I've read, that it's going to be massively affected because many of the development sites, potentially the car parks, that will rely on to service the retail sector in the city centre. So I would ask through you, Chair, that this committee actually needs to know more really about the master planning. And again, I would learn that I'd urge the City Council to learn lessons. The master planning on the public realm had insufficient public consultation. It was brought really to a point where the public got involved at a far too later stage. Now, notwithstanding that the current council is indicating that it's to be extensive public and stakeholder engagement, much of the master planning, though, will have been done. We're in a situation where the council, working with key partners, is commissioning work to design a future scheme for the city centre. And I would actually just urge the council to actually take the public on board now to establish some principles. So I've seen an image, is it 30 tower blocks in the city centre, popped up on an image in the media that's promoted a new town in the city centre. And I really wonder if the public are going to support the concept if we don't, and I'm not convinced at the moment. I don't know enough about the proposals to give any view as to whether it's good, bad or indifferent. What I do know as a Plymouthian, though, is that the city centre significantly changed after the Second World War and effectively eradicated much of its population from the rebuilding and the Abercrombie plans, which at that time were visionary and, you know, providing a city centre that was state of the art. We all know now that actually it was a bad concept. We should have kept more people living in the city centre and not made it a retail desert. So I would caution the council going down the road of developing very detailed proposals only then to really have sensible engagement with the public, because it's far too late. And what the public, and this is why the public is sceptical of politicians, the council, the government, is that all too often it's all like a done deal. And the perception is that actually it's not meaningful consultation, it's that we have to consult and it's a tick box exercise. So I won't be supporting an endorsement this afternoon. I'm happy to note the council's direction of travel, but I can't endorse a strategy that I don't know anything about. And I'm not, as an elected member, I don't expect to have to read, without any explanation, council reports, or indeed from the media, very valuable though they may be, to get to get my information to make a decision. So thank you for mentioning it, but I think it's actually a separate issue altogether. And your report in terms of the utilisation of car parks, is welcomed, noted, but I think very much that all the council deserve a briefing. All the council deserve the opportunity to know the detail of the direction of travel, what the likely impact could be, and whether we sign up to the principles of what's being set out before the council commits thousands of pounds with other agencies of public money to develop something that won't be supported by the public. And we know what happens when the public don't support something, councils will be booted out.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, if I can just jump in. Obviously, in terms of what we're asking for recommendations, it was recommendations for the development. So we're certainly in no position to be talking about what the actual detail is. Obviously, it is a sort of once in a lifetime, but it's a very significant opportunity. We've got the defence deal that's been announced, 4.4 billion going into Plymouth across the next 10 years. And obviously the new town that we're talking about with 10,000 homes. So this is really a game changer in how the city centre wider waterfront is going to be shaped. So that needs a sort of master planning to do that. It's not a plan that officers are sort of sat working on ourselves. We need to bring in expertise to develop that. So I know that's being commissioned, and within that there's a transport strategy, and obviously parking is a key aspect of transport. So you're right, it's quite a practical paper giving you updates on numbers and usage, etc., and then spanning into a realm that is outside of parking, because it's a much bigger issue and probably deserves a scrutiny in its own right, and no doubt will, either through this one or the growth scrutiny. But yeah, it's very much asking you to endorse the development of an integrated parking transport and parking strategy to support this work that's happening. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you.
Can I add that to that as well? And we've known from past experience, recent past experience, we need to be a listening council, listening to elected members, listening to the public. The recommendation means that actually it's not homes alone. It's about the city centre functioning as a live community, meeting the needs of a variety of people. Transport and parking is a critical part of that as well. So it's not a case of, right, we're just going to put some housing and fit it into the city centre. It'll be crucial as the master plan is developed that there is critical liaison. The plan needing to be held to account as part of scrutiny, but also proper cooperation with elected members, with the public, as it states, to actually get it right and to listen to all views. And there could be all sorts in the paper. It's speculative. A lot of it is. So people will pick up things, but I think it's important that we grasp this golden opportunity, but do it properly. And something that we can be proud of as a council, as part of the growth board in Plymouth, involving different organisations, as Andy said, but also to bring the public along to excite them that this is something that will be great for them and their children and the future people who visit the city.
Can I just come back on Councillor Stevens' point? So when do you think there will be enough information to have some meaningful discussion of principles, both with the wider membership of the council, because the council isn't just a scrutiny panel, there's 57 of us, and equally the wider public, just on the principles?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not in a position to give a timescale now, but the principle of sharing and bringing on board people will be a strong aspect of this work. So basically, I agree with you. Okay, I don't agree with you that you don't agree with this, but that you don't endorse it. But I agree with you that it's important to have wide consultation and buy-in from people.
All I would say, Chair, for the committee is that I'll propose an amendment when we get there, but to substitute endorses with notes.
Just thank you, Patrick. Obviously, the kind of report that we've got today was, now I've not been part of this committee for a little while. Now I thought we were tackling what we were going to do with parking and travel when we build 10,000 new homes. I thought that was the idea behind the chair's questioning. I think you've provided us with a really good how our car parks operate at the moment and what future needs, and I know I was involved in it for a few years, what we see with the city centre. But actually that has changed now because we've got the investment from Homes England, the commitment to deliver, and Patrick and I don't always agree, but actually we need to be getting involved in scrutinising as a panel, but also as a wider members about how that takes shape, because I think we can give, or council members can give another approach with the understanding of what's happened in the past in Plymouth under certain actions from certain leaders of the council, that we can actually all learn from that and be involved. So I think, but I would also say we need to take into account there, it's not only where people are going to park. That is a big proportion, as you say, Councillor Stevens, but there are other modes of transport that in the future are going to play a bigger part. So we're talking about, we talked there about EVs in the city centre, but we need to develop that further because we've all got two legs. So how are we going to walk in? How are we going to travel in by buses? What's the long-term objective of getting people out of the car from like Stonehouse or Devonport, which is 5 minutes on the bus? So we need to be looking at the overall strategy, including car parks, but how we actually bring fundamental change to the way that people travel. And I think this is a place for us to be able to input some suggestions for you to go away and look at, not just yourselves, but with your colleague, with Councillor Penberthy on housing, the leader, Councillor Briers-Delve on what are we going to do with the environment once we get people in here. So I think it's a bigger picture than that. So I know Gary's got a suggestion, but I think we would need the recommendation that I would want to see come out of this panel is that we note the work that you've done in the report that you've given us, but we would actually recommend that going forward, this scrutiny panel and wider members of the council have an input into the future transport strategy for the development of the city centre. We were talking about that just now.
Chair, I think it's excellent. It's not just transport though, it's actually the redevelopment of the city centre full stop.
Yes.
As a wider piece. Transport's a key one, but Councillor Stevens is the Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning, so he needs to look at the whole thing. And I think all members should be involved in the whole process. So I'll welcome your contribution, and Mr. Wallbridge.
Could I come in there? You're absolutely right. This isn't just about car parking. The report was published because of the chairman wanting an update on last year's parking strategy. Since then, the Homes England thing, the growth plan has taken off. This is just to acknowledge that as part of our car parking strategy review, actually the Homes England, the city centre development is a significant piece of work. That's going to impact, and as we clearly state, integrated transport. Councillor Coker, you're right. It's not just about what can we do for within the city. It's how people move. Is critical to this. A bigger emphasis on public transport is critical. All the evidence suggests that those who wish to live in a city centre with the type of population that is expected, not all of them will be travelling by car, replicated by 10,000 homes worth in the suburbs or in the city. We've just got an unusual city centre. But we just need to convert it to contribute to the growth situation. So that's why this report is as it is. It's based on the car parking situation, but also to acknowledge that when we're looking at car parking strategy, we're also going to look at the integrated transport, children, young families, and work. We'll look at schooling. It's a cross-council piece of work. Whether that is done in individual scrutiny panels like this, or whether it's scrutiny management board, or a different type of scrutiny, but the whole thing does need to have buy-in from council. It needs to be held up to say, okay, what does this mean for our city in a whole range of our city's functions? So I can't argue with what you're saying, but but this is why this is inserted like this, to say transport and parking is integral to the development of the city centre.
All I would reiterate, it's bigger than just one panel, or even two panels. There are 57 members, and if you can't convince them to be your advocates for the council in the communities, it'll be a non-starter. So start from the beginning, involve everybody, and let's be on a journey together. I wasn't around after the Second World War, but hopefully those that were, feels like it, but hopefully those that were might have felt that they were involved in the rebuilding of Plymouth. And if we want to redevelop the city centre, it affects the whole city, and therefore the whole city needs to be taken together on the journey.
And Councillor, as Andy said, we're at that point of commissioning people to do this work for us.
Can I just remind members, please, that there are people watching online, and when you're having conversations with yourself, the camera doesn't switch. So if I could ask, the reason I sit here is to try and keep people talking to each other and making it understandable for everybody. So please use the chair before you get into discussions. It would make my life a lot easier. Councillor Penrose.
Thank you, Chair. I raised my hand before you last spoke after Councillor Nicholson, and I'm just so relieved at what you said, because I felt very uncomfortable with the first recommendation, and I felt very inadequate. And I did mutter to my neighbour, what are we supposed to do with this? Because I just felt we couldn't endorse this huge thing. So I'm just very grateful to you for unpicking that for me, us. And I would request that perhaps we elaborate on this so that it's clear of what Councillor Stevenson has said is clear what Councillor Nicholson has said. I think that would help everybody, and I'd be very grateful if you could do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. I think what I want to do, if there are any other questions first, before I just kind of sum up a little bit, Patrick.
Already said enough, haven't
I? What I think I would like to recommend is that where we've got the recommendations that are offered to us, we just ignore them and put our own. So I would say we recommend that we note the car parking report for the previous ask for the previous 12 months, and thank you for providing that. And then I think we need to capture what I said, Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Penrose, in breaking down a recommendation as to how we move. And I know Gary might have got some idea, because we were talking just now about how we log that, because I think it is a wider issue. But where I slightly disagree with Councillor Nicholson is, yes, it is a wide issue, but I do think the first input should be from this committee, because that's what we're here for, and then we go to wider council members, so that we just follow the process through. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Councillor Nicholson.
I think, you know, we can say both in any recommendation that a further report, a future report, needs to be brought to this committee in relation to the redevelopment of the city centre between the City Council and key stakeholders, and wider council consultation among members needs to take place in future. It can be an all-encompassing recommendation, but clearly there's an action for a future report to come to this committee, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nichols. Look, my vice chair has just whispered to me, would this not be a subject that we should take to Scrutiny Management Board just to widen it and agree there the principles of how we want to do this? Because each of the chairs are at the Scrutiny Management Board.
As long as it does, I trust you, Councillor Coker. As long as it doesn't shut down debate, I'm absolutely happy with it. And I think we need to take cognizance that actually it shouldn't be sort of refined to one panel. There are cross-cutting scrutiny. There's issues that cross-cut more than one scrutiny panel. And as long as we have a say on this one, I know the growth one equally will want a briefing. As long as you manage that as chair of the scrutiny management, absolutely fine.
You have my undertaking, Councillor Nicholson. So I would suggest that we just note the report that is given to us and we refer the greater details of how we break down the scrutiny to the Scrutiny Management Board meeting.
And you'll at some point, as chair of that board, communicate with us as to what you've agreed.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I'll be asking you a question at council house.
You always do, or you always did. Yes, Elliot.
Through you, Chair, I just thought important to put on record that it naturally falls to the Natural Infrastructure and Growth panel because it has transport policies and strategies, sustainable public transport and cycling within its terms of reference. So it most fits there. We pick up the point of parking, but it's less strategic parking. So if we take it to Scrutiny Management Board, we can have that debate. Yeah. But a full report when you're sort of developing this policy would naturally go to Natural Infrastructure and Growth.
I think the point, Elliot, is that this is so significant, notwithstanding that the terms, the brief of another panel probably have more involvement. Equally, the impact on housing and the delivery aspect, which is the purview of this committee, means that probably the same report needs to go to two panels. But that will be for Councillor Coker to have that debate.
So can I just ask that members are happy with that approach? Yeah, thank you very much. Have you got that, Elliot?
Yeah, noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so that draws that. Councillor Stevens, thank you. Mike, Andy, thank you very much. We now move on to item number 10, which is the action log. So I'm going to hand over to Elliot for that.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that quite a few actions have been moved on in progress or marked as complete since the publication of the agenda. Emails have been sent out with those updates, but I'll briefly run through them. So on the front page, in relation to Central Park Ponds project, all of those actions are green and have been provided by Kat Deeney. We currently have a in-progress action for minute 5 of the grit bin policy review. The report there summarises that there was not enough time prior to the commencement of the winter season to review all of the grit bins where ownership was questioned. And the intention is to undertake this prior to the next winter season. So it hasn't been it's in action, in progress for the next year of winter season. Underneath that was a second recommendation relating to the grit bin policy, which was to consult all members on the proposed moves, and that has been actioned. Under that, we have homelessness and rough sleeping update, and that information has been circulated on the 15th of this month. We have one other action in progress, which is the improved public connectivity with Plymouth City Council. I have a draft of that, and it will be ready to come out to you hopefully by the end of next week. So although that is an old action, that is very nearly with you. And the final one on the agenda was this serious violence duty, and that has been completed. And there's a full report for the Safer Plymouth strategic assessment available online and should have been sent to members. Happy to take any questions on those, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Elliot? No? Okay, thank you very much. And work programme, Elliot.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, over to the committee and yourself, to schedule items, but we provisionally have listed Plymouth Active Leisure, which would be pre-decision scrutiny on the upcoming contract decision for Plymouth Active Leisure. I'm afraid I'm not able to go into the details of that myself because I haven't got the knowledge on it, but Gary might be able to help out. And we also have the public toilet strategy review, which has been on the agenda for quite a while. That's finally ready to come back to us. So those two provisionally listed, Chair.
I don't know what members think, but for the 10th of December, we have got PALS, which I think is really important that we do that. But actually, if there's nothing else urgent and the public toilet strategy is available and ready, I think we should bring that forward because I think that matters to members of the public. So I would recommend that we bring that to the next meeting. So we've got two meaty items to discuss. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't just ask for one further update on the Central Park project. No worries. Given the fact there was some recent communication by the City Council and a press release regarding further delays to the ponds project at Central Park, could we also ask for a written update in relation to progress on the Central Park's ponds project? And perhaps Kat Deeney could be present, please.
That's noted, thank you.
Okay, and then, I've got feedback. What I would then suggest is when the actual chair is back in circulation, that we need to feed him item agendas for the next meeting or two, because we've actually moved up the agenda and he's got nothing on his work programme. And I will be asking him at the Scrutiny Management Board next month how his work programme for the rest of the financial year is. So I would openly ask members to give him something to look at.
Could I just suggest, I did forget actually, and I had thought about this over the last few weeks, not necessarily scheduled for the 10th of December, but could we have a review on allotments and the usage of allotments and the management of allotments, please?
Then put that to the chair.
Yeah, well, we just want to let you discuss it next time.
Yes, all right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes today's meeting. So thank you for bearing with me, who had to step in at the last minute.
I think you got the job, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right, thank you. And we've actually finished 3 minutes earlier than was scheduled. So that takes a bit of doing. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.